felt simple and outdated. There was a single bed with a thin gray blanket, a wooden dresser with chipped corners, and a small lamp on a nightstand. I could see the road through a narrow window. The overhead light gave off a weak yellow glow that flickered occasionally. I dropped my bag on the bed and let out a sigh. A few minutes later, I made my way to the dining area. It was a dim space with a low ceiling and a row of tables covered in plastic cloths. The owner appeared again, served me a plate of meatloaf with mashed potatoes, and offered a cup of coffee. She kept glancing at the floorboards. It was hard not to notice. Once in a while I thought I heard a soft thump, but it could have been pipes or just the old building settling. I tried to ignore it. When I finished eating, I asked her if she had any dessert. She shook her head and told me the kitchen was closed for the night. She gave me a strained smile. I heard another dull thump, this time a bit louder. I said, "What is that?" She pretended not to understand and started clearing dishes from the table. I didn't press her. Her shoulders were tense and her eyes darted around as if she expected something else to happen. I went upstairs and changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants. I washed my face in the small bathroom attached to my room. The hot water took a while to come out, and the faucet sputtered. I could see my reflection in the stained mirror, and I noticed how tired I looked. My eyes had dark circles, and I felt the tension in my neck. I decided to turn in early. As soon as I lay on the bed, I heard faint bumps coming from somewhere below. It sounded like a soft knocking, then what could have been a whisper. I couldn't make out words, but it made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, rolling over and burying my head in the pillow. For about an hour I tossed and turned, half asleep. Then the noises grew louder. They echoed in a steady rhythm, like someone trying to get attention. I sat up, heartbeat picking up speed. I listened carefully, convinced it had to be pipes or the old structure shifting. But then I heard a voice, low and strained. It was impossible to tell what it said, but it sounded pleading. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the floor. My pulse pounded in my ears. I remembered the owner's warning, "Don't go down there." But my curiosity was spiking. I tried to push the thought away. It was late, and I had a full day of work ahead. I climbed back under the blanket and forced my eyes shut. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep. Not long after, I dreamed I was walking down the inn's hallway. It looked darker and smelled musty. I heard knocking behind the walls, and with every step I took, the floor shook. My mouth was dry and my palms were sweaty. The dream felt too real, like I was actually there. I tried to speak, but my voice stuck in my throat. Suddenly, I came to a door at the end of the hall. It was locked, but I heard scratching on the other side. My hand reached for the doorknob, and the metal felt ice cold. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. The same knocking noise lingered in my ears even after I opened my eyes. I stared at the ceiling, breathing fast. My room was silent. My chest felt tight, but I told myself it was just a dream. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. I got out of bed and walked to the door. In the hallway, the lights were even dimmer than before. Everything looked tinted yellow. My footsteps echoed on the worn carpet. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The downstairs was pitch black. I could just make out the faint outline of the reception desk. I flicked the wall switch, but nothing happened. No lights came on. My heart gave a quick jolt. I thought about returning to my room, but my legs moved on their own. I started creeping down the steps. The wooden boards groaned with each movement. At the bottom, I heard a faint hum like an electrical current or an old freezer. I followed the sound along a short corridor that led to a closed door. The door had a heavy padlock, and I realized it must lead to the basement. I placed my hand on the wood. It was cold, almost like metal. I felt a slow, steady pulse, as if something on the other side was alive. My heart thumped so loudly that I worried it would wake the owner. My hands shook. I stepped back, forcing myself to return upstairs. I didn't want to get thrown out in the middle of the night for trespassing, and I had no idea what I was dealing with. Once in my room, I locked the door and stood there in the dark. I couldn't sleep for hours. When morning came, I felt like a zombie. At breakfast, the owner was nowhere in sight. A small sign by the dining area said, "Self-service." I found some cold cereal and milk in the fridge. While I ate, I listened carefully for anything unusual. The place was quiet. The morning sunlight made the lobby look less frightening, but I still felt on edge. I decided I wouldn't think about the basement. I had a busy day of meetings and presentations. I left my key at the front desk and headed out. All day my focus drifted. I pictured that locked door, felt that cold, pulsing sensation against my palm. My head started to ache. During a lunch break, I rubbed the back of my neck and stared at my notes, but the words swam in front of me. By late afternoon, I had an intense urge to go back to the inn and figure out what was going on. I got back around 6 and saw the owner in the lobby. She stood behind the desk, counting out some bills. I walked up and said, "Everything okay here?" She gave me a stiff nod, avoiding eye contact. I took the key and went to my room. I set my briefcase on the dresser and lay down on the bed, trying to rest my eyes for a bit. A deep, slow tapping sound started up again. It was fainter now, but it still made my nerves hum. Each tap felt like a question, and I could feel it under my ribs. I forced myself up and headed downstairs, determined to ask the owner straight out. She was standing by the front door, flipping the open sign to closed. I said, "Look, I'm not trying to pry, but I keep hearing noises. I know there's something going on in the basement. You warned me not to go down, but I need to know what's happening. I'm losing sleep." She put a hand on my arm, and her grip was tense. She muttered, "It's locked for a reason. It's been locked for years. Please don't mess with it." Then she turned away and disappeared into the back office. I hovered there, unsure of what to do. The basement door was right down that short corridor. The padlock had probably been there for decades. If it was so important, why not add a chain or something else? Why only one lock? My hands felt clammy. My stomach was twisting. I went back to my room and paced for a while. Around 9, I heard the owner's door downstairs close, and I guessed she had turned in for the night. The place felt deserted. I grabbed a small flashlight from my travel bag. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. I slipped out of my room and crept down the hall. My heart raced as I descended the stairs. The corridor leading to the basement was dark. The overhead bulb was out again. I switched on my flashlight, aiming it at the door. The padlock looked old and rusty. I tested it gently and it rattled, but it stayed firmly in place. I felt that cool vibration again, as if something behind the door was aware of my presence. I tried to calm myself by taking slow breaths. I told myself I was acting ridiculous, but I couldn't stop. I pointed the flashlight around the corridor and saw a small closet nearby. Inside there were some cleaning supplies, a few dusty boxes, and a set of old tools. A hammer, pliers, some screwdrivers, and a small crowbar. My eyes locked onto the crowbar. I grabbed it without letting myself think too much. I lined up the crowbar's tip against the edge of the lock. My hands were sweaty, and the metal felt slippery. I took a deep breath and applied pressure. The lock screeched against the wood. I paused, listening for footsteps upstairs. The place stayed quiet. I tried again, pressing harder. The lock groaned, and then the hasp gave way. The padlock fell to the floor with a clank. My heart felt like it was hammering out of my chest. I swallowed, took another breath, and tried the doorknob. It turned. When I opened the door, a smell hit me like a wave of stale, damp air. It was freezing down there. My flashlight beam caught a set of cement steps leading into darkness. The walls were rough and covered in patches of mold. I forced myself to move one step at a time. Each step echoed. At the bottom, I found a small corridor with a low ceiling. My flashlight revealed a single door at the end of the passage. This door was wooden, painted gray, and looked warped from moisture. There was no padlock on it, but the handle seemed old and discolored. I approached it carefully, shining the light around. The walls had deep cracks, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked like scratched markings near the bottom of the door. My breath came out in fast bursts. I touched the doorknob, and it felt colder than ice. My fingers went numb for a second. There was a faint hum from behind that door, like a low drone. I pressed my ear to the wood, but all I could hear was that deep humming and what sounded like a faint throb. I turned the knob. It didn't open. I tried harder, but it stayed locked. My mind raced. I remembered the nightmares. I remembered that sense of something behind the door. Part of me wanted to run upstairs, pack my bag, and leave. But I couldn't stop now. I used the crowbar again, wedging it between the frame and the door. My arms shook with the effort. The door made a cracking sound. My heart thumped. Then the door popped open, sending me stumbling forward. I caught myself shining the flashlight inside. The room was small, with concrete walls and no windows. It was empty except for a large metal cabinet in the corner. The air was colder than anywhere else in the basement, and I saw my breath in front of me. My teeth chattered. I walked slowly toward the cabinet. My pulse hammered so hard I felt lightheaded. The cabinet door was slightly ajar, and I could see something glinting in the beam of light. I braced myself and pulled the door open. A metal cylinder sat on the bottom shelf, about the size of a gallon paint can, with wires wrapped around it. It gave off a gentle vibration. I reached out and felt the surface. It was ice cold and pulsed under my palm. The wires led to a small battery device that blinked with a red light. I noticed it was locked in place by a clamp. My mind jumped to all sorts of explanations, but none of them made sense. Was it some old experiment? Some weird generator? I had no clue. I grabbed the cylinder carefully. It was heavier than I expected and seemed to tug at my hand, like a magnet. The pulsing got stronger the longer I held it. My vision blurred for a second. I felt dizzy and lost my balance, dropping to one knee. My flashlight clattered on the floor and the beam flickered across the walls. My ears started ringing. I forced myself to release the cylinder, and the sensation faded. I gasped for air, heart pounding. I backed away from the cabinet. I picked up the flashlight, my hand trembling. The object in that cabinet felt alive in some strange way. My mind was spinning. Something about it matched the weird dreams I'd been having, like it was the source of the knocking and whispering. Without really thinking, I slammed the cabinet door shut. I stumbled out of the room, back through the corridor, and climbed the steps 2 at a time. Once I reached the top, I pushed the basement door shut and jammed the padlock's broken piece back in place. My breath came in frantic bursts. My skin was damp with sweat. I felt a pounding headache behind my eyes. I made my way to my room as fast as possible. I locked the door, sank onto the bed, and tried to slow my breathing. My head was spinning with questions. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear my thoughts. My pulse kept racing. At some point, I dozed off, only to wake up to that same dull knocking. It felt like it was right inside my head. My chest tightened, and my stomach churned. Now, every time I hear that knocking, I think of that metal cylinder pulsing in my hand. My ears still ring when I remember the vibration. I can't figure out what it is or why it's down there. The owner never explained. I'm not even sure she knows exactly what she's hiding. But each night I lie here and stare at the ceiling, listening for the next thump, the next whisper. Sometimes I catch myself turning off the lamp and walking into the hallway, as if I'm drawn to it without meaning to be. The nightmares haven't stopped. In them, I see that small room, that metal cabinet, and the cylinder's glow. I see my own hand wrapped around it, unable to let go. Tonight is my last night at this inn. I'm not sure if I can make it until morning. The knock is starting again, slow and steady. My skin prickles and I feel my pulse hammering. I keep telling myself to ignore it, but my body feels on high alert, like I'm in a constant state of panic. I don't know if I'll ever sleep properly again. Even if I leave tomorrow, I'll carry this feeling with me. Part of me wants to run out of here right now, but another part of me is thinking about going back down, just to see if the door is still open and if the cylinder is still there. I can't decide. My hands won't stop shaking. I can hear the owner pacing around downstairs. Every so often her footsteps stop and I wonder if she's listening to that sound too. Maybe she's known about this for a long time. Maybe she's tried to destroy it but couldn't. I don't know, and I don't think she'll tell me. All I know is that I feel trapped in this place, even though I can walk out anytime. I sit here on the bed, listening to my ragged breathing and the faint bumps under the floor. It's cold. My body feels stiff, and my heart won't settle down. The flashlight is on the nightstand, pointed at the door. I'm scared to turn it off. My mouth is dry, and I keep rubbing my arms, trying to warm up. The sound from below won't stop. It's like a heartbeat that's just out of sync with mine. I'm counting the minutes until dawn, hoping I don't lose my nerve. If the door to the basement stays closed, maybe I can slip away at first light, but I'm not sure if I'll ever really leave this place behind. I never believed in haunted houses, but I also never spent much time alone in a place with a bad reputation. When I first showed up at that old mansion, I was just looking for a quiet spot to stay for a month. A friend of mine had given me the key. He told me it belonged to an old family in town and that nobody lived there anymore. He didn't say much else, and I didn't bother asking. I just wanted a roof over my head while I took care of a job in the area. I pulled up in my truck on a cloudy afternoon. The driveway was a strip of gravel that crunched under my tires. The house stood at the end of the property. Tall windows, chipped paint on the walls, and a front door that looked warped from age. I remember the sky was gray, and the wind was cold enough that I felt it in my bones the moment I stepped out. I carried my bag up the front steps. The boards creaked under my boots. There was a feeling in the air that made me uneasy, like the house was holding its breath, waiting to see who had arrived. I tried the key, and it turned easily. Inside, the foyer was dark. I saw old wooden floors, dusty portraits on the walls, and a wide staircase ahead of me. The place smelled like old furniture and stale air. It wasn't pleasant, but I kept telling myself I would only be here a few weeks. I flipped a few light switches near the door, but only one worked. A dim light bulb and a hanging fixture flickered overhead. It didn't do much to chase away the shadows in the corners. I dragged my bag into a room on the ground floor that looked like a sitting room. There were 2 large armchairs facing each other, and a small table between them. Everything was coated in dust. My eyes stung from it. When I breathed in, I felt like I was inhaling decades of neglect. I coughed a few times and decided to open a window. The window slid open with a groan, and a blast of cold air rushed in, making me shiver. As I looked outside, I noticed the yard was pretty overgrown. Tall grass, an old tree with twisted branches, no sign of life. I tried not to think about how run down everything looked. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the ground floor, looking for the kitchen, a bathroom, and the circuit breaker. The hallways felt chilly, and I couldn't figure out if the heating system was broken or if the place just retained a permanent cold. Whenever I paused, I had the strange sense that something was moving nearby. I checked over my shoulder a few times, but I never saw anything. The furniture seemed to be where I left it, though I did notice an old coat rack that hadn't been in one corner the first time I walked by. I told myself I must have just missed it. Later, I found the breaker box in a laundry room. I flicked a few switches, but the wiring seemed ancient and only a few lights came on around the house. I decided to keep my flashlight and a few spare batteries with me just in case. I also found a dusty bedroom upstairs. It wasn't much, but it had a bed and a dresser. I put my clothes away and set up a small lamp. The bed creaked when I sat down to test the mattress. At least it was better than sleeping on the floor. That first night I had trouble sleeping. Around midnight, I heard something in the hallway. It sounded like soft footsteps. My heart thumped in my chest. I sat up in bed, listening. The steps seemed to move slowly, like someone was pacing back and forth. I got out of bed and walked to the door. I opened it a crack. The hallway was dark, and the only light came from my lamp behind me. I stepped out, holding my breath, but the hallway was empty. The floor felt cold under my bare feet. My hands were shaking a bit from the tension. After a minute, the footsteps stopped. I waited another few seconds. Then I went back to bed, telling myself the house was old and probably settling. I didn't believe it, but it was the only explanation I had. The next day I woke up stiff and tired. I decided to clean up a bit, try to make the place more livable. I spent the morning dusting some of the furniture and sweeping the floors. Every so often I thought I saw something move in the corner of my vision, a shift in the shadows near a chair, or a curtain that flickered when the windows were closed. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Still, it made me uneasy, and I rushed through my chores with sweat forming on my forehead. By late afternoon, I needed a break. I sat in the foyer on one of those old chairs, drinking water from a plastic bottle. That's when I heard a faint whisper. I looked around, thinking maybe a draft of wind was blowing through a crack in the wall. The whisper seemed to come from the direction of the staircase. It was too soft for me to make out words, but I felt my skin break out in goosebumps. My stomach got tight and I stood up, determined to figure out the source. I approached the stairs slowly, stepping on each creaky step until I reached the second floor. There was no one there. The hallway was quiet, and I didn't hear that whisper again. I exhaled and realized my throat was dry. That night I tried to relax in the living room. The electricity in that room was working, so I turned on a low-watt lamp by the couch. The old couch smelled like mildew, but it was better than sitting in the dark. I was flipping through an old magazine I found in a drawer when I heard a thump above me. It sounded like it came from the attic. I hadn't been up there yet. The idea of going into the attic in this house made my heart race. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard another thump. It was louder this time, like something heavy dropped onto the floor. I grabbed my flashlight and headed upstairs again, adrenaline pushing me forward. There was a narrow door at the end of the second floor hallway. It led to the attic steps. The door stuck a bit when I pulled on it, but it finally gave way. Dust filled the air, and the attic stairs creaked under my weight. The space was lit by a single weak bulb hanging from the rafters. I aimed my flashlight around. There were old trunks, crates, cobwebs everywhere, and a large mirror leaning against the wall near some boxes. I saw my reflection in the dirty glass. My face looked tense, and I could see sweat on my forehead even though the temperature was cold. I glanced around for anything that might have made the thump, but everything was still. Nothing was on the floor, and no boxes looked like they had fallen. I felt a wave of confusion. Then I spotted a weird shape in the mirror out of the corner of my eye. I turned, but it was gone. I shined my flashlight onto the mirror, and I only saw myself standing there. My pulse pounded and my eyes darted around the attic. No sign of anyone else. I left the attic as fast as I could. I closed that door behind me, hoping I wouldn't hear any more noises. In the early hours of the morning, I woke up drenched in sweat. My bedroom was freezing. The blankets barely did anything to keep me warm. I could hear a faint creaking sound in the hallway, like someone was gently rocking on a loose floorboard. My chest tightened and I sat up, holding my breath. The door to my room was closed, but the noise was just on the other side. It moved from one end of the hallway to the other. I felt paralyzed. I stared at the doorknob, half expecting it to turn on its own. After a few minutes, the noise stopped. I sat there in the dark, my heart thudding. I waited, but it didn't come back. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, though it was restless and filled with unease. Over the next few days, I started to notice strange changes around the mansion. Chairs were a few inches away from where I left them. A small table in the foyer looked like it had shifted closer to the wall. One morning, I found my flashlight on the stairs when I was sure I had left it on the kitchen counter. Every time I tried to push these things out of my mind, something else happened. I heard faint whispers at odd times. I felt cold drafts in corners where there were no windows or vents. My heart raced almost constantly, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I would see someone standing behind me, but there was never anyone there. On the fifth night, the footsteps returned. This time they moved toward the attic door. I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and a heavy wrench from the kitchen, thinking I might need to defend myself if this was some intruder. I climbed the stairs, each step shaking under my feet, and I turned the knob to the attic door. It opened without a sound. I stepped in, shining my flashlight ahead. The single bulb still hung from the ceiling, casting weak light on the piles of boxes. The mirror was still leaning against the wall. I moved closer to it, shining the flashlight on the glass. My reflection stared back, tired and anxious. My hair was messed up, and my eyes looked bloodshot from lack of sleep. Then I noticed a dark shape to the side just behind me in the reflection. It was disfigured, like it couldn't keep a solid form. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned around fast, wrench raised. There was nobody there. When I looked back at the mirror, the shape was gone. I felt a wave of dizziness, like my head was spinning. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my hands steady. I moved around the attic, checking behind boxes, looking under old chairs, but I found nothing. The mirror stayed where it was, leaning in the same position. I stood in front of it again, waiting, but the shape didn't appear. The only thing I heard was my own breathing. I flicked off the attic light and headed back downstairs, my mind racing with questions. I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. Over the following nights, I kept waking up at odd times. Each time, I heard whispers or footsteps. My entire body would tense up and my heart would pound. My mouth went dry and I could barely swallow. I also noticed the mansion's corridors were always cold, as if some unseen presence was sucking the warmth out of the air. I started to sleep during the day just so I could keep watch at night. My eyes stung from exhaustion, but I couldn't rest properly anymore. This situation was becoming an obsession. I wanted to figure out what that shape was, why I only saw it in the mirror, and why it vanished when I turned around. I spent hours in the attic, sitting on a dusty stool, staring at the mirror. Sometimes I felt a rush of air behind me, but I never saw anything when I turned. If I kept my eyes on the reflection, I would catch a flicker of that shape, like a blurred silhouette in the corner. It gave me chills every time. My stomach would clench, and I'd break out into a sweat. It was always gone by the time I turned my head. After a while, I realized it seemed to appear when I was facing away, as though it only existed in the reflection. I tried different angles, different lights, even different times of night. A few times I whispered, "Who are you?" and waited. I never got a response I could understand. There were only faint sounds like distant footsteps or the scrape of something against the floorboards. My chest felt tight, and my breathing would speed up whenever I tried to talk to it. Sometimes I questioned my own sanity, but the physical reality of the cold air and the shifting furniture kept me convinced there was something real happening. After 2 weeks, the tension in the house started to wear me down. My hands shook when I tried to drink coffee in the mornings. I jumped at every small sound. At one point, I watched the coat rack in the foyer tilt as if someone pushed it. There was no draft, and I hadn't touched it. It just shifted, then settled back in place. My heart almost burst out of my chest. I rushed over to it looking for wires or anything else, but I found nothing. At night, the footsteps got louder, and the whispers were closer to my room. Sometimes they sounded right behind the door. I sat in bed, gripping my sheets, struggling to keep my breathing steady. My muscles were always tense, and I woke up with cramps in my shoulders and neck. I tried calling my friend who gave me the key, but he didn't answer. I felt isolated, like the mansion itself was cutting me off from the outside world. On the 20th night, I decided I had to confront whatever was in that mirror. I waited until I heard the footsteps pacing in the corridor. I grabbed my flashlight and walked up to the attic again. My heart hammered in my chest, and my throat felt dry. I entered the attic, turned on the light, and stood in front of the mirror. I forced myself to look directly into it. My breath came in short gasps. I whispered, "Show yourself." For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then I saw the shape appear behind me in the reflection. It was tall, hunched, and out of focus. My breath caught in my throat. The wrench slipped from my hand and clattered on the floor. I felt a rush of cold air around my shoulders. My skin prickled, and my eyes watered. It felt like every nerve in my body was on high alert. I forced myself not to turn around. My heart felt like it was going to explode. The shape seemed to shift. Its edges wavered. I clenched my fists and tried to speak again, but I couldn't get the words out. My mouth was too dry. Then the shape moved closer in the reflection, coming right up behind me, until it was only a few inches away from my back. My legs trembled, and my stomach lurched. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I could feel cold sweat dripping down my face. The overhead bulb flickered. I could see its movement in the glass, but I still couldn't turn. A wave of nausea hit me, and I nearly collapsed. Suddenly, the shape melted away, like it had never been there. My reflection was alone again. I dropped to my knees, breathing hard. My chest felt tight, and I pressed a hand against the floor to steady myself. My heart was racing so fast that I thought it would never slow down. After a while, I managed to stand up, grab my wrench, and leave the attic. I locked the attic door behind me, though I knew that wouldn't keep anything out. I spent the rest of that night in the living room, with every light on. I stared at the doorway, half expecting to see that shape standing there. By morning, I felt too drained to think straight, but I knew I had to figure out what it wanted. There was no way I could go on living like this. I searched the mansion, looking for old letters or anything that might explain the presence in the attic. I found a few dusty documents in a desk drawer, mostly receipts and deeds. Nothing mentioned a spirit or a hidden occupant. I wanted to find a simpler explanation, but I couldn't. On my last night in the mansion, I heard the steps again, and I knew they were heading to the attic. I followed them, my legs feeling shaky. I stood at the bottom of the attic stairs, and I heard a whisper that sounded like it was calling me up. My heart fluttered, but I forced myself to go. When I entered the attic, the light was already on. The mirror stood in the corner. My reflection waited in the glass. I approached it. My hands were sweating, and my breath came in shallow bursts. I didn't speak. I just stared. After a moment, the shape appeared behind me again. It moved in the same slow, uncertain way. I watched it raise what looked like an arm. My stomach churned. I could feel an iciness on my neck, like something was right behind me. I stood there, refusing to turn around. My body trembled. Then it vanished. The overhead bulb popped and went dark, leaving me in the glow of my flashlight. I stumbled out of the attic and slammed the door. I felt a surge of relief just being out of that space. I hurried down the stairs, packed my bag, and left that old mansion. I didn't care about finishing my stay. I felt like I was escaping with my sanity barely intact. I never went back to that place. I still don't know what that disfigured shape was or what it wanted. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me, but I haven't heard whispers or footsteps since I left. All I know is that mansion had something in it that I could see in the mirror, but never faced directly. Even now I get chills thinking about it. I don't tell this story to many people because most don't believe me. That's fine. I know what I heard and what I saw, and I know I'm never stepping foot in that house again. I got this clock last month. It came to me when my grandfather's lawyer sent me a letter saying there was an item in his estate that belonged to me. I expected some old piece of furniture or maybe a family photograph. Instead, I found a tall pendulum clock with a worn-out finish on its wooden case, a faded face, and a heavy metal pendulum inside. I set it up in my hallway because I thought it looked kind of impressive, even if it gave me a strange feeling. I noticed right away that it never seemed to stop, no matter how long I left it running. I didn't need to wind it as often as other clocks. It just kept going, ticking in a steady rhythm that filled the house at night. On the first evening, I went to bed around 11. I could hear the clock chime the usual times, 1, 2, 3, all the way until midnight. At midnight, it chimed 12 times. But I heard an extra chime right after the 12th, like a 13th strike. The sound was low and a bit off-key. I sat up in bed, confused. I reached for my phone, checked the time, and saw it was 12 o'clock on the dot. Still, the clock had given one extra ring that didn't make sense. I didn't think much of it right then. I thought maybe the gears were old and something misfired. I eventually drifted back to sleep. The rest of the night felt calm, and I didn't hear anything else. The next night, it happened again. But this time, Right after the 13th chime, I heard a light creaking outside my bedroom. It was almost like someone brushing against the wall. My bedroom door was closed. I got up, turned on the lamp, and walked carefully toward the door. I listened for anything. I heard the faint swish of curtains in the living room. It was a soft sound, like fabric moving against the window frame. I wondered if a draft came through the old window, but I felt no breeze in the hallway. I went into the living room. The curtains were swaying, but the windows were shut. Nothing else seemed out of place. I felt uneasy, like someone else was in there with me. On the third night, I watched the clock around midnight. I wanted to see if that extra chime would happen again. At first, the minute hand approached 12 and the clock chimed normally. Then it delivered that 13th chime. I was right there, staring at it. The sound felt heavier than the other notes. Right after it echoed through the hallway, I heard something scrape against the floor in the living room. I rushed to check. I saw one of the chairs next to the dining table had moved, maybe a foot from where it usually sat. I looked around to see if I had left it like that, but I knew I hadn't. I felt my heart pounding. I checked all the windows again. They were closed. I didn't see a reason for that chair to move. On the fourth night, I tried to stay awake past midnight, but I ended up nodding off. At exactly midnight, I heard the clock's chimes wake me up. By the time it finished, I was wide awake in bed. Right after the 13th chime, I heard a louder sound, a dragging noise like a heavy piece of furniture scraping across the floor. I jumped out of bed and grabbed my phone for light. My hands were shaking and my throat felt tight. I followed the sound to the living room again. This time, a larger cabinet near the wall seemed to have shifted. It wasn't in the same spot. I reached out and touched it, and it was a bit crooked. I felt a cold sensation on my arms, like a drop in the temperature. My heart was beating so hard that I had trouble focusing on anything else. I realized I couldn't ignore this anymore. Something was moving around my house after that 13th chime. I decided to examine the clock the next morning in daylight. I got up early, made some coffee, and pulled the clock away from the wall to check its back panel. The wooden surface looked old and was covered in small symbols. They were carved in a way that suggested someone took a lot of time to etch them. They looked like circles, lines, and shapes that I couldn't recognize. I ran my fingers over them and felt grooves. The wood was smooth except for those carved spots, which were rough. Some of the lines formed a pattern that looked deliberate. I didn't know what it meant, but I got an uneasy feeling again, like I shouldn't be looking at them. I tried to see if there was any brand name or maker's mark, but all I saw were these odd symbols. I decided to check the inside of the clock, so I opened the case. The pendulum swung back and forth in a steady rhythm. It made a soft ticking sound that never stopped. I reached in and gently touched the pendulum. The metal was cool to the touch. Above it, the gears turned in a slow, constant cycle. I noticed more symbols on the inner panel. They looked similar to the ones on the back. This was no ordinary design. Something about the arrangement felt old and, honestly, a bit sinister, but I still didn't know what I was dealing with. That night I felt restless. I watched TV to distract myself, but I kept glancing at the clock. I heard the regular chimes every hour until midnight. The moment midnight struck, the clock chimed 12 times as always. Then it gave that strange 13th ring. Right after that, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They weren't loud, but they were distinct. My entire body tensed up. I got up from the couch, walked slowly into the hallway, and tried to see who might be there. I saw nobody, but I felt this pressure in my chest, like the air was heavier. The curtains in the front window swished back and forth as if someone walked by them. I rushed over and looked outside. There was nothing there. When I turned around, one of the dining chairs slid a few inches across the floor, right in front of me. I backed away until I bumped into the wall. My breathing was shallow, and my hands felt sweaty. That was the first time I was certain something unseen was actually walking around. The following day, I tried to research the clock. I wanted to see if I could find any reference to a clock that chimed 13 times. I didn't find much. I looked through some old local antiques forums, but nothing seemed relevant. I considered calling an antiques dealer, but I was too embarrassed to mention the strange occurrences. Instead, I studied the symbols I had seen on the clock. I even tried sketching them. I typed keywords into search engines, but the results were random. I didn't find any direct information on these carvings or any mention of a 13th chime. I started to feel paranoid. I kept looking over my shoulder as if someone stood behind me. That evening, I stayed in the living room with the lights on. I set up my phone to record video around midnight. I wanted proof that something happened. The clock chimed 12 times, then gave the extra chime again. Right on cue, the temperature felt colder. The air on my arms felt like it dropped 10 degrees. My phone still pointed at the dining area. At first, I only heard a soft swish, then a scraping noise. I tried to hold still and focus on every detail. The chairs moved, the curtains fluttered, and I heard faint footsteps. I couldn't see anything or anyone. After a few seconds, I got so uncomfortable that I stood up and turned on every light in the house. The noises stopped. Everything settled. I walked over to my phone to stop the recording. My hands were shaking. When I played it back, I heard the scraping, the swish, and the footsteps, but I saw no figure. The furniture seemed to shift without any visible cause. I didn't know what to do with that. The next few days, I spent time carefully inspecting every part of the house. I checked the locks on the doors. I tried to see if there was some hidden mechanism that could explain the movement. I found nothing. I even put tape on the floor around the furniture to see if I could measure how far it moved each night. The next night, after that 13th chime, the chairs moved past the tape line by at least 6 inches. I felt a rush of fear each time it happened, like an electric jolt in my stomach. My breathing got tight, and my forehead broke out in sweat. I lost a lot of sleep. My mind was constantly on edge. Every small noise during the day made me jump. A week later, I noticed I sometimes felt a presence during the day as well. It was weaker, but I sensed it. I'd walk into the living room and feel a slight chill. The curtains would sway even though the windows were locked. The clock kept ticking, always in that steady rhythm. I tried once to remove the pendulum and stop it, but the clock wouldn't halt. The second I let go of the pendulum, it kept swinging on its own. That freaked me out more than anything else. I felt this surge of panic, and my heart pounded against my rib cage. I slammed the clock case shut and left the house to clear my head for a while. When I came back later that afternoon, I could swear the clock's ticking sounded louder. I stood there, feeling like the thing was looking at me somehow. My phone rang, and I nearly dropped it. It was just a neighbor asking if everything was okay, because they heard odd noises at night. I lied and said I might be rearranging furniture. I didn't want them to think I was losing my mind. After that call, I went to the clock and looked at the symbols again. I ran my finger across the carvings. Some lines had a repetitive pattern like a loop with points around it. I had no clue what they meant, but they looked ancient. My body felt tense, and I started breathing harder. Nighttime came again. I felt more anxious than usual. I left the TV on for background noise, but I paced around the living room, watching the clock. At midnight, it chimed 12 times, and then there was that extra note. I waited. Nothing happened right away. I kept pacing, feeling my palms sweat. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a cold touch on my upper arm, like an icy hand pressing against my shirt. I froze. My chest tightened, and I had trouble inhaling. My heart banged inside my chest. I jerked my arm away, but the feeling stayed for another second before disappearing. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. Then I saw the curtain sway again, and one of the chairs twitched almost like it was about to move. I ran out of the room and shut myself in the bathroom to catch my breath. I stood there with my hands braced on the sink, trying to calm down. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever energy was tied to that clock was getting stronger. It was touching me now, or at least coming close enough that I felt it against my body. I sat on my bed, staring at the hallway through the open door. The clock's ticking reached my ears, steady and unending. I felt like I was on edge every second, waiting for something else to happen. I tried to recall if my grandfather had ever mentioned this clock or warned me about it, but I didn't remember anything. It was just there, a piece of old family property. Now it was mine, and I had no clue how to handle it. The next morning, I pulled the back panel of the clock off again. I grabbed my phone, took detailed photos of every symbol, and decided to contact someone who might know about weird artifacts. I found a local collector's shop online. It specialized in odd antiques. I sent an email with the pictures attached. I wrote that I had an old clock with carvings I couldn't identify. I left out the haunting details. A few hours later, I got a reply. The owner said the symbols might be part of an old ritual design, possibly linked to certain esoteric beliefs. She asked me if there were any unusual occurrences or if the clock had come from a known collector. I didn't respond right away. I felt a chill reading her words. At least I confirmed the carvings were some type of ritual markings. That day passed slowly. I kept glancing at the clock. I tried to ignore the ticking, but it seemed to fill every quiet moment. I wanted to smash the thing to pieces, but I was afraid of what might happen if I did. I thought about taking it outside, but I had no place to store it. I was also worried that the presence might follow me anyway. By the time night fell, I felt exhausted. I turned on all the lights again and sat on the couch, telling myself I had to be calm. Midnight arrived and the clock chimed 12 times. Then came the 13th. My body tensed. I gripped the edge of the couch. I heard a faint creak on the hardwood floor behind me. My neck and shoulders got tight. I spun around and pointed my flashlight app from my phone at the hallway. There was nothing there, but I heard movement, like a soft shuffle. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Then I felt it again, that cold sensation on the side of my face. I jerked away, stumbling to stand up. My phone fell from my hand and clattered on the floor. I picked it up, breathing hard. The living room curtains were moving in slow waves, and one of the chairs slid out from the table. I yelled at it to stop, feeling a bit ridiculous. My voice came out shaky, and I got goosebumps all over my arms. The presence lingered for a few more seconds, dragging the chair a few inches farther. Then everything went quiet again. I hardly slept that night. I felt watched every minute. In the morning, I decided to take that clock to the collector's shop. I called ahead, but the line just rang. I left a message. I didn't want to wait any longer, so I wrapped the clock in a thick blanket, trying to avoid looking at those symbols again. I got it into the back seat of my car. Even with it sitting behind me, I felt a prickling along my neck, like someone was staring at me. I drove to the store, but there was a sign on the door that said they were closed for the day. I stayed in the parking lot for a few minutes, feeling desperate. I tried to call again, but no one answered. I finally gave up and drove home. The clock kept ticking in the back seat as if it was mocking me. When I got home, I brought the clock back inside. My heart sank when I placed it in the hallway again. It felt like I was inviting that presence back into my living space. I stared at the clock face for a while, watching the second hand sweep around. That steady ticking sounded louder than ever. At times, it felt like I could hear other noises under the ticking, but I couldn't be sure. I placed the clock down, took a deep breath, and stepped away. It started chiming on the hour as usual. The normal chimes didn't scare me anymore, but I dreaded midnight. I didn't want to hear that extra ring again, didn't want to feel that cold touch or see chairs drag across the floor. But I knew it would happen, and I wasn't sure how to end it. That's where I am now, sitting here with the clock nearby. It's late evening, and I can see the hour hand inching toward the 12. I have all the lights on. I've pushed the furniture against the walls, hoping it won't move as much. I'm just waiting, my heart pounding, and my skin prickling with dread. That 13th chime is coming. I don't know how to stop it. All I know is this clock never stops ticking, and whatever rides along with that 13th note is getting bolder each night. I keep looking at the carved symbols on the wood, and I feel like they're staring back at me, waiting. I'm trying not to panic, but my stomach is in knots. The pendulum is swinging, counting down the seconds. Any minute now, it will be midnight, and that presence will move through my house again. I'm too scared to run, and too scared to stay. The clock is about to strike. I can hear the gears shifting. I can feel that chill growing in the air. I'm gripping the edge of the table. I can't look away. This clock is mine, and there's no one else here to see what happens next. I started my first night in the library feeling confident. The building was massive, with endless rows of shelves. The ceilings were high, and the lights hung in neat rows overhead. My shift began at midnight, and I walked in expecting a peaceful job. I figured I would just mop the floors, dust off tables, and keep an eye on the place until morning. On that first night, the air felt cool, and everything smelled like old paper and leather. I liked it at first. It reminded me of quiet afternoons in small bookstores. But this wasn't a small bookstore. It was a giant historical library with locked sections and hidden corners. Despite the size, nothing seemed strange at the time. I finished cleaning around 4 a.m. and sat in the staff room until the shift ended at 6 a.m. The second night was similar. I swept the halls, checked that the doors were secure, and left without a problem. By the third night, I started to notice little details that made me uneasy. I remember walking down the oldest wing of the library, near the back shelves where few people go. The floor creaked under my feet. The lights above flickered for no obvious reason, and a faint breeze touched my skin. It was odd because there were no open windows in that part of the building. I looked around, saw nothing, and kept moving. I shrugged off the chill, telling myself the old wiring probably caused the lights to flicker. As I dusted the edges of the books, I heard what sounded like a slow scrape along the floor. I paused. I didn't see anyone, but I felt like I was being watched. I stood there, my broom in hand, trying to hear it again. The sound didn't repeat. I shook my head and continued working. Around 3 a.m. that same night, I heard a soft thud in the stacks. I followed the noise and found 3 books on the ground. They were heavy volumes, probably centuries old. They had been on a high shelf, so it surprised me that they fell out without me touching them. I picked them up, placed them back, and checked if the shelf was loose. It didn't seem loose. I pressed the spines, gave the shelf a little shake. Everything stayed in place. Still, I chalked it up to bad luck. Old libraries have quirks. I had no reason to suspect anything else at that moment. But the next night, I caught a glimpse of something that changed my perspective. I was standing near a corner desk when I looked down a long aisle. I saw 2 faint red lights at the far end, close to the floor. They looked like eyes reflecting light, but not like cat eyes or anything familiar. They were just small red dots. I froze and stared for a few seconds, trying to make sense of them. Then they disappeared. The hair on my arm stood up and I felt a jolt of adrenaline. I blinked several times, but the aisle was empty. I told myself it must have been some reflection from a distant exit sign, but my gut told me otherwise. I decided to check that aisle. I walked over, shining my flashlight along the shelves and the floor. I didn't see any animals or anything that could reflect like that. The temperature felt colder in that section. My breath felt tight, and I shivered a bit. After a minute, I left the aisle and returned to my routine, hoping it was my imagination. Over the next few shifts, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. I would be cleaning, and I'd sense movement at the edge of my vision. I'd look over and see a dark shape vanish behind a shelf. I never got a clear look. It happened at least twice a night. Then the odd noises started to increase. Sometimes I heard a soft click, like nails on the floor. Other times I heard a faint shuffle that made me picture someone dragging their feet. Whenever I tried to investigate, the lights would flicker, and I'd smell something damp and musty, like wet leaves in a basement. The smell hit my nostrils and lingered. I'd hold my breath, shining my flashlight around, but I never found a wet spot or source of the smell. It just appeared, then faded after a few seconds. One night around 2 a.m., I decided to walk to the far back corridor. There was a sealed-off door that led to an older storage area. I never had a reason to go there before, but I felt pulled in that direction. The corridor was dark because the overhead lights in that section were out. I used my flashlight to see. My footsteps echoed on the tiled floor and the air felt colder with each step. Halfway down the corridor, the lights farther behind me went out for a few seconds. I stopped in my tracks. When they flickered back on, I saw what looked like footprints on the floor, leading toward the sealed door. They were shaped like wet footprints, but the size looked a bit off, like they were too long or the toes were too pointed. My stomach clenched. I moved closer, shining the flashlight on them, seeing they glistened under the beam. The footprints ended at the door. I reached out and touched the door's handle. It felt cold, almost like metal that had been in a freezer. I tried to open it, but it was locked. I stood there, my breathing shallow, feeling my heartbeat in my ears. A soft, scraping sound came from behind the door, and I jumped back. I stood there for a moment, listening. The noise stopped. I hurried away from that corridor, deciding I'd had enough for the night. After that, I started to dread coming to work. I needed the job, so I had to keep going. On my next shift, I came prepared with a heavier flashlight. I wore an extra jacket because that cold feeling was getting worse every night. Right after midnight, I began to sense that same presence. I was cleaning near a reference desk when a sudden gust of cold air made the papers on the desk flutter. There were no windows or open doors nearby, so I clenched my jaw, uneasy. Then I saw those red reflections again, this time behind a row of old shelves on my left. I stood still, focusing on them. They didn't vanish immediately. They stayed there like they were observing me. I took a few steps closer and the overhead lights flickered off. My heart pounded and I gripped my flashlight tighter. When the lights came back on a second later, the red reflections were gone. I felt my arms shaking and sweat ran down my back. The air smelled musty again, like rotting wood. I swallowed hard and tried to keep calm. Around 3 a.m., I found more books on the floor. This time, a whole row of them had slid out. They formed a messy pile on the aisle. I tried to pick them up quickly, but as I grabbed the first one, I heard slow breathing behind me, almost like a soft hiss. I whipped around, shining my flashlight, but I saw nothing. My hand shook, and my chest felt tight. I forced myself to focus on the job. I stacked the books on a cart to return them to the shelf. As I slid one back into place, I noticed droplets of water on the spine. They were small, but they smelled stale, like pond water. I wiped them away with my sleeve and felt a lump in my throat. I kept looking around, expecting something to jump out, but all I saw were shelves and desks. By the time my shift was half over, I decided to do a quick round of the entire building. I wanted to make sure all doors were locked, hoping to rule out trespassers. I checked every entrance, tested every lock, and found nothing unusual. The exterior windows were secure. The place was sealed up, just like it always was. I walked back toward the older section. My mind was filled with questions. Was I going crazy? Was something messing with me? Each step felt heavier than the last. My palms were sweaty, and I kept swallowing to steady my nerves. Then, as I turned a corner, I saw the shape of a tall figure at the far end of the hall. I stopped dead in my tracks. The figure was hunched with long limbs, standing near the shelves. 2 red glints appeared where the eyes should have been. I gripped my flashlight and tried to say something. My throat was so tight no sound came out. The figure twisted its head toward me. Then the overhead lights flickered again. In that split second of darkness, I heard a soft scraping sound, and when the lights came back on, it was gone. My stomach lurched. I turned around and walked away fast, scanning the aisles. No sign of it. The corridor felt empty. The only thing left was that stale, moldy smell. For the rest of the night, I paced the main reading hall, too nervous to check the deeper sections alone. Every few minutes, I looked over my shoulder, checking for any movement. My body was tensed up like a coiled spring. Around 5 a.m., I heard another noise from the back corridors, but I ignored it. I wasn't going to chase that thing by myself. I counted the hours until sunrise, feeling my pulse throb in my neck. As soon as my shift ended, I turned off the main lights, locked up, and got out of there. On the following night, I decided to record any strange sounds on my phone. I arrived at midnight, trembling inside, but I tried to hide it. I walked through the main hall, phone in hand, the recording app open. I spoke quietly, logging the time. Then I headed toward the older wings. I turned a corner near the far shelves, and I saw those red eyes again. They flickered like distant embers. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. The air was cold. My teeth started chattering. I took a few steps forward, trying to fight the urge to run. The lights flickered, but this time they stayed off for a few seconds longer. In that darkness, my flashlight illuminated a shape moving across the row, hunched and slow. It made a slithering noise on the floor. My phone's recording should have picked it up. I felt my breath catch in my throat. When the lights came on, the shape was gone, and I spotted wet footprints trailing around the corner. My heart hammered so hard that my chest hurt. I followed the footprints step by step, with my flashlight aimed low. They led deeper into a side passage that was usually closed off. The door there was slightly ajar. I had never seen it unlocked. My phone kept recording, capturing my shaky breathing and the echo of my footsteps. I pushed the door open, shining my light inside. The room smelled damp. A few broken shelves leaned against the walls, and there were crates stacked in the corner. I saw footprints leading to the back of the room, then stopping at a blank wall. The wall had patches of mold on it. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement. My heart pounded in my chest and sweat dripped down my forehead. I took a few steps into the room. The door slammed shut behind me. I nearly dropped my flashlight. I turned, grabbed the handle, and yanked it open again. I hurried out, not bothering to look back. I didn't want to be trapped in there with something I didn't understand. My hands shook for the rest of the shift. Over the next few nights, similar events happened. More books fell, more cold winds whipped through the halls, and those red eyes appeared at random spots. Each time, the smell of mold and wet earth followed. My body was on constant alert. I found myself jumping at small sounds like the hum of the vending machine or the ticking of a clock. My stomach churned. My legs felt weak. When the shadows seemed to lengthen, I found myself clenching my fists, prepared for some kind of confrontation. But the creature always vanished. It never attacked me or made a direct move toward me. It just watched. It felt like it was guarding something, or maybe warning me. I had no idea what it wanted. Last night I reached a new level of fear. Around 2 a.m., a sudden gust of air whipped through the reading hall, scattering papers and shifting chairs. The overhead lights flickered in unison, and I felt a pressure in my ears like a low hum. I pressed my palms to the sides of my head. Then I saw it again, standing by the reference section, those red eyes fixed on me. It lifted a hand with long fingers, and I felt a burst of cold against my face. My eyes watered. My lungs felt tight. Then the lights flickered off for a few seconds, leaving me in total darkness. My flashlight failed, probably from the intense flicker. When the overhead lights came back, the creature was gone. A single thick book lay open on the floor, pages fluttering in the aftermath of the gust. I leaned down to look at it. The text was in a language I couldn't read. The pages were damp to the touch and smelled foul. I pushed the book shut, noticing my fingers were trembling uncontrollably. Now I stand here at the end of another shift. My hands are still shaking. I'm trying to process everything that's happened, but I don't have answers. The library hides something, and I feel like it's getting bolder. I see the red eyes more often. I smell the damp odor before I even walk into the old section. I feel that cold wind even in the staff room. It's like the entire building is wrapped in something I can't fight. My uniform shirt clings to my back with sweat and my throat is dry. I think about quitting, but I need the paycheck. Besides, part of me wants to understand what's happening. I know that might be stupid, but I can't help it. Every night, I walk these aisles, waiting to see if the red-eyed shape will appear again. My flashlight is always ready. My heart pounds like a drum in my ears. I don't know how long I can keep this up. The library has its secrets, and now I feel like one of them. I just wish I could finish a night without shaking. without stumbling over fallen books or catching a glimpse of those eyes. But every time I step through the doors at midnight, the cold breeze seems to greet me, and I know it's there, watching, waiting, leaving footprints on the floor. And I know that with each turn, I'm more vulnerable than before. I never cared about ghost stories. I used to think they were just make-believe. Then I started traveling to the interior for work and everything changed. One night, I was driving along a deserted road after a long day of meetings. The road was dark and empty. My headlights lit up short sections of asphalt and there were no other cars in sight. I was used to that route, but something felt off that night. My shoulders were tense and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there. I had been on the same road many times before. It's an old 2-lane highway without many signs or gas stations. The only light came from my car's high beams and the pale moon overhead. I was tired, and my eyelids felt heavy. But I pushed forward because I wanted to get home. Then I saw a shape on the shoulder. At first, it looked like a person standing still, facing the road. As I got closer, I could make out a suit that looked out of fashion. It reminded me of old photos of my grandfather in a rigid suit and tie. The man didn't move. He stood at the edge of the road with his arms at his sides. I rolled down my window a bit, thinking maybe he needed help, but as soon as I did that, a chill ran across my arms. My scalp prickled. I kept my foot on the gas, but I slowed down. Something about him felt wrong. He looked like he had no face. There was a hat, and under that hat there was no color or shape of eyes, nose, or mouth. It was just blank. I thought maybe my eyes were tired and playing tricks on me. But he was there, standing absolutely still, not even glancing in my direction. When I passed him, I felt pressure in my chest. It was like a tightness I couldn't explain. I quickly rolled the window up. I didn't see any headlights behind me or in front of me, so I was alone with this silent figure on the shoulder. I drove away, but my neck tingled. It felt as if he wanted me to stop. My entire body felt restless, and I kept looking in my rearview mirror. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding, but there was nothing else on the road. I tried to push the memory aside. Maybe it was some hitchhiker. Maybe it was someone messing around. It looked too strange, though. The next few times I had to travel for work, I took the same route. I hated that road, but there was no faster way to my destination. During the day, it felt normal enough. The sun lit up the fields around the highway, and I saw cows, fences, and old barns. At night, everything changed. The darkness seemed thicker out there, and the quiet was absolute. I would sometimes hear a distant echo of my own engine bouncing off the trees. Each trip became more nerve-wracking than the last. I remembered that faceless figure often. His suit looked worn, and the cut was from another era. His posture was rigid, like he had been waiting for years. I told myself it must have been a tired illusion. I told myself that seeing his face was impossible because of the angle or the poor lighting. But none of that convinced me. Deep down, I knew what I saw. That knowledge gnawed at me. Then, about a week later, I had to drive back on a late Friday night. Work ran longer than expected, so it was around midnight when I got back on that lonely road. I drank coffee to stay alert. I turned up the radio to fill the silence. The air was cold, and the windows started fogging slightly. My mind kept drifting back to that night with the strange man. My shoulders stayed tense as I drove, and I kept checking the mirrors. I didn't see anything behind me. The radio signal got weaker the farther I went into the countryside. Static crackled, and I had to fiddle with the dial. Then I saw flickering headlights up ahead. Another driver was on the opposite side of the road, flashing the high beams like they wanted to warn me of something. I slowed down. My palms felt clammy on the wheel. The other car passed me. I caught a glimpse of the driver's face through their window, but they looked stressed, eyes wide. It was just for an instant, but it made me uneasy. I kept going. The road dipped and rose. The headlights illuminated fences and dead trees. That's when I felt it. It was a feeling like someone was behind me in the car. I glanced at the rearview mirror. There was nothing. I let out a shaky breath and gripped the wheel tighter. My mouth went dry. I tried to tell myself that my mind was playing tricks on me again, but the feeling stayed, heavy and cold. I kept checking the mirror every few seconds. Then a low static noise filled the car. I looked down at the radio. The station had gone to pure white noise, but I could still hear a faint rustling. I reached over and turned the volume knob. The static lowered, but in that silence I heard my own breathing. My chest felt tight again. I couldn't concentrate on anything else. Suddenly, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision like a brief shadow. My heart thumped. I jerked the car a little to the right, nearly hitting the rumble strip. I slowed down, panicking. I checked the back seat again. For a split second, I thought I saw the outline of a person. My brain told me it was a reflection of something. My eyes told me something else. I pressed the gas and kept my attention on the road. My pulse hammered. I tried to keep both hands steady, but they trembled. Every time I passed a reflector post by the side of the highway, the light flickered. My anxiety kept rising. I felt corners of my vision blur from time to time, as if I was about to see that faceless man again, right inside my car. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to focus. The rest of the drive was tense. By the time I reached home, my legs felt weak. Over the next month, I had more trips. I couldn't avoid the route. My boss gave me instructions, and the job paid well, so I swallowed my fear and kept driving. Each time I tried to leave earlier in the day, but sometimes it was impossible. I ended up crossing that lonely highway close to midnight. I would feel a presence behind me. Sometimes I even heard soft sounds that might have been fabric shifting in the back seat. It was never clear or obvious, but it made my heart thud. I would look back, see nothing, then feel the seat behind me vibrate or move slightly. My imagination or something worse. One night I decided to test my courage. I pulled over at a small rest stop around halfway through the route. The rest stop was a small patch of concrete with a single vending machine and a flickering light. There was no one around. I got out of the car to stretch. My breath came in quick bursts, and I felt the night air on my face. My hands still shook. I peered into the back seat from outside using the overhead dome light. There was nothing there, just my jacket and some old receipts. I sighed and leaned against the car. I listened to the wind blow through the trees. It sounded hollow. After a few minutes, I got back in. The seat felt colder than before, and the steering wheel felt damp under my palms. I hated that feeling. I started the engine again. The headlights cut through the darkness, but the beams seemed weak to me, like it wasn't enough to chase away what lurked in the corners of my eyes. I went back on the road, keeping the radio off this time. The tension in my chest stayed. My mind kept wandering to that one night I saw the faceless figure. He had stood there in silence like he was waiting for me. Now it felt like he was hitching a ride in my car every time I passed. About a week later, I was heading home on that same stretch, well past midnight. I noticed a faint glow in the distance. Then I saw a pair of headlights moving slowly ahead of me in the same direction. I approached the vehicle. It was an old pickup truck moving at a crawl. I thought maybe the driver had engine trouble. I flicked my high beams gently to signal I was about to pass. As I went around, I looked at the driver's side. My heart jolted. The driver looked like he was wearing the same style of suit, hat, everything. I couldn't see his face. Just a blank space under the brim of the hat. I nearly slammed on the brakes, but I was too afraid to stop in the middle of the highway. I pressed the gas and surged past. My chest felt ready to explode. I checked the rearview mirror. The truck was still behind me, moving slowly. My scalp felt like it was crawling. I stared at the truck for a few seconds. It drifted behind me, eventually vanishing in the darkness. I kept driving, sweat rolling down the sides of my face. My clothes felt sticky. By the time I reached the next town, I pulled over at a gas station. I got out and paced around the parking lot. My breathing was shallow, and I had trouble focusing. The station attendant gave me a strange look, but I didn't explain anything. Eventually, I got back in my car and drove the final stretch home. For the rest of the night, I couldn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blank face. I woke up in a sweat and paced around my apartment, turning on lights and checking the doors. My hands were shaking. I felt my pulse beating in my neck. I pressed a cold water bottle against my forehead and tried to calm down. In the following days, I tried to speak to a coworker about that highway. I asked if they had ever seen anything strange at night. They just shrugged and said sometimes you see random drifters or maybe a weird local. Nobody else seemed bothered. I thought maybe I was alone in this. Maybe it was all in my head. But then I remembered how real the figure looked, how certain I was about that missing face. I started to dread every trip. The fear began to dominate my thoughts. Even during the day, if I saw an old suit in a store or on someone, my stomach would tighten. I tried changing my driving routine, thinking if I left extra early, I'd never face that road at night. But sometimes schedules shift, and I found myself there in the dark again. The moment I turned onto that stretch of highway, I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. My posture got rigid. I gripped the wheel. I checked my mirrors constantly, half expecting to see a shape in the back seat. My thighs felt tense against the seat. My jaw locked. I could almost feel a faint breath on my neck, which made me jerk forward. I remember one night when I actually heard a whisper. It was so soft I almost convinced myself it was the wind. But it felt too close. My heart pounded and my eyes darted to the rearview mirror. My hands shook so hard I could barely keep the car straight. I flipped on the overhead light and looked back. Empty seats. No one there. Just that cold, stale feeling that made me want to get out and run. But there was nowhere to go. It was the middle of nowhere, and the road stretched out for miles. Sometimes other cars would pass by, flashing headlights at me. Each flash made me clench my teeth. I'd brace myself, waiting for something to appear in my mirror. My mind screamed at me to keep looking forward, to ignore the reflection. But curiosity and fear forced me to look. I never saw him there. But the sensation never left. By the time I got home, my legs were always shaky. I'm still traveling on that road. I can't avoid it. It's the main route to the interior for my work. Every time night comes and I'm behind the wheel, my heart rate speeds up. My throat goes dry. My eyes dart to every shadow on the shoulder. Occasionally, I think I spot a lone figure far off, but then it's gone. My rational side says it's just a tree or a sign. My instincts say otherwise. I keep driving because I have no choice, but I feel him back there. I feel his gaze, even without a face. I feel his presence behind me in the car, in the seat that should be empty. Now, whenever I enter that highway, my stomach tightens. My thoughts race. My hands turn clammy on the wheel. The hum of the engine gets louder in my ears. I hear every bump in the road. Each passing reflector startles me. My eyes flick to the rearview mirror over and over. I imagine a shape materializing in the back seat at any second. I try to focus on the next mile marker, the next gas station, the next turnoff. Anything to keep my mind from drifting back to that silent man in the old suit with no face. But in my gut, I know I'll see him again. And when I do, I know that chill will spike through my body, and my breath will catch in my throat. It's the same feeling every time, and I can't shake it. I don't know who he is. I don't know if he's even human. All I know is that he appeared once, and now I can't stop feeling like he never really left. I got to the old inn around 7 in the evening, feeling stiff and hungry. The place stood alone on a stretch of dusty road, leaning to one side, with a crooked sign that read, Maplewood Inn. The paint on the sign was chipped, and the front porch lights flickered. I was tired from driving all day, and all I wanted was a warm meal and a place to sleep. The owner, a thin woman with tired eyes and a tight gray bun, greeted me at the front desk. She ran my credit card through a squeaky machine and handed me a heavy brass key. Her voice was calm but low when she said, The basement's off limits. Don't go down there." She said it with a serious stare that made me pause. I tucked the key in my jacket pocket and asked, "Why mention it at all?" She just shook her head and waved a hand. I figured it might be some storage area or something she didn't want guests messing with. It didn't feel like much of a warning to me at first. I just nodded and gathered my small bag from the floor. I went up the worn wooden stairs. Each step creaked under my weight. The place smelled like old wallpaper, dusty carpet, and something stale in the air. The door to my room stuck a little, so I had to shove it open with my shoulder. Inside, the room felt simple and outdated. There was a single bed with a thin gray blanket, a wooden dresser with chipped corners, and a small lamp on a nightstand. I could see the road through a narrow window. The overhead light gave off a weak yellow glow that flickered occasionally. I dropped my bag on the bed and let out a sigh. A few minutes later, I made my way to the dining area. It was a dim space with a low ceiling and a row of tables covered in plastic cloths. The owner appeared again, served me a plate of meatloaf with mashed potatoes, and offered a cup of coffee. She kept glancing at the floorboards. It was hard not to notice. Once in a while I thought I heard a soft thump, but it could have been pipes or just the old building settling. I tried to ignore it. When I finished eating, I asked her if she had any dessert. She shook her head and told me the kitchen was closed for the night. She gave me a strained smile. I heard another dull thump, this time a bit louder. I said, "What is that?" She pretended not to understand and started clearing dishes from the table. I didn't press her. Her shoulders were tense and her eyes darted around as if she expected something else to happen. I went upstairs and changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants. I washed my face in the small bathroom attached to my room. The hot water took a while to come out, and the faucet sputtered. I could see my reflection in the stained mirror, and I noticed how tired I looked. My eyes had dark circles, and I felt the tension in my neck. I decided to turn in early. As soon as I lay on the bed, I heard faint bumps coming from somewhere below. It sounded like a soft knocking, then what could have been a whisper. I couldn't make out words, but it made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, rolling over and burying my head in the pillow. For about an hour, I tossed and turned, half asleep. Then the noises grew louder. They echoed in a steady rhythm, like someone trying to get attention. I sat up, heartbeat picking up speed. I listened carefully, convinced it had to be pipes or the old structure shifting. But then I heard a voice, low and strained. It was impossible to tell what it said, but it sounded pleading. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the floor. My pulse pounded in my ears. I remembered the owner's warning, "Don't go down there." But my curiosity was spiking. I tried to push the thought away. It was late, and I had a full day of work ahead. I climbed back under the blanket and forced my eyes shut. Eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep. Not long after, I dreamed I was walking down the inn's hallway. It looked darker and smelled musty. I heard knocking behind the walls, and with every step I took, the floor shook. My mouth was dry and my palms were sweaty. The dream felt too real, like I was actually there. I tried to speak, but my voice stuck in my throat. Suddenly, I came to a door at the end of the hall. It was locked, but I heard scratching on the other side. My hand reached for the doorknob, and the metal felt ice cold. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. The same knocking noise lingered in my ears even after I opened my eyes. I stared at the ceiling, breathing fast. My room was silent. My chest felt tight, but I told myself it was just a dream. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. I got out of bed and walked to the door. In the hallway, the lights were even dimmer than before. Everything looked tinted yellow. My footsteps echoed on the worn carpet. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The downstairs was pitch black. I could just make out the faint outline of the reception desk. I flicked the wall switch, but nothing happened. No lights came on. My heart gave a quick jolt. I thought about returning to my room, but my legs moved on their own. I started creeping down the steps. The wooden boards groaned with each movement. At the bottom, I heard a faint hum like an electrical current or an old freezer. I followed the sound along a short corridor that led to a closed door. The door had a heavy padlock, and I realized it must lead to the basement. I placed my hand on the wood. It was cold, almost like metal. I felt a slow, steady pulse, as if something on the other side was alive. My heart thumped so loudly that I worried it would wake the owner. My hands shook. I stepped back, forcing myself to return upstairs. I didn't want to get thrown out in the middle of the night for trespassing, and I had no idea what I was dealing with. Once in my room, I locked the door and stood there in the dark. I couldn't sleep for hours. When morning came, I felt like a zombie. At breakfast, the owner was nowhere in sight. A small sign by the dining area said, "Self-service." I found some cold cereal and milk in the fridge. While I ate, I listened carefully for anything unusual. The place was quiet. The morning sunlight made the lobby look less frightening, but I still felt on edge. I decided I wouldn't think about the basement. I had a busy day of meetings and presentations. I left my key at the front desk and headed out. All day my focus drifted. I pictured that locked door, felt that cold, pulsing sensation against my palm. My head started to ache. During a lunch break, I rubbed the back of my neck and stared at my notes, but the words swam in front of me. By late afternoon, I had an intense urge to go back to the inn and figure out what was going on. I got back around 6 and saw the owner in the lobby. She stood behind the desk, counting out some bills. I walked up and said, "Everything okay here?" She gave me a stiff nod, avoiding eye contact. I took the key and went to my room. I set my briefcase on the dresser and lay down on the bed, trying to rest my eyes for a bit. A deep, slow tapping sound started up again. It was fainter now, but it still made my nerves hum. Each tap felt like a question, and I could feel it under my ribs. I forced myself up and headed downstairs, determined to ask the owner straight out. She was standing by the front door, flipping the open sign to closed. I said, "Look, I'm not trying to pry, but I keep hearing noises. I know there's something going on in the basement. You warned me not to go down, but I need to know what's happening. I'm losing sleep." She put a hand on my arm, and her grip was tense. She muttered, "It's locked for a reason. It's been locked for years. Please don't mess with it." Then she turned away and disappeared into the back office. I hovered there, unsure of what to do. The basement door was right down that short corridor. The padlock had probably been there for decades. If it was so important, why not add a chain or something else? Why only one lock? My hands felt clammy. My stomach was twisting. I went back to my room and paced for a while. Around 9, I heard the owner's door downstairs close, and I guessed she had turned in for the night. The place felt deserted. I grabbed a small flashlight from my travel bag. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. I slipped out of my room and crept down the hall. My heart raced as I descended the stairs. The corridor leading to the basement was dark. The overhead bulb was out again. I switched on my flashlight, aiming it at the door. The padlock looked old and rusty. I tested it gently and it rattled, but it stayed firmly in place. I felt that cool vibration again, as if something behind the door was aware of my presence. I tried to calm myself by taking slow breaths. I told myself I was acting ridiculous, but I couldn't stop. I pointed the flashlight around the corridor and saw a small closet nearby. Inside there were some cleaning supplies, a few dusty boxes, and a set of old tools. A hammer, pliers, some screwdrivers, and a small crowbar. My eyes locked onto the crowbar. I grabbed it without letting myself think too much. I lined up the crowbar's tip against the edge of the lock. My hands were sweaty, and the metal felt slippery. I took a deep breath and applied pressure. The lock screeched against the wood. I paused, listening for footsteps upstairs. The place stayed quiet. I tried again, pressing harder. The lock groaned, and then the hasp gave way. The padlock fell to the floor with a clank. My heart felt like it was hammering out of my chest. I swallowed, took another breath, and tried the doorknob. It turned. When I opened the door, a smell hit me like a wave of stale, damp air. It was freezing down there. My flashlight beam caught a set of cement steps leading into darkness. The walls were rough and covered in patches of mold. I forced myself to move one step at a time. Each step echoed. At the bottom, I found a small corridor with a low ceiling. My flashlight revealed a single door at the end of the passage. This door was wooden, painted gray, and looked warped from moisture. There was no padlock on it, but the handle seemed old and discolored. I approached it carefully, shining the light around. The walls had deep cracks, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked like scratched markings near the bottom of the door. My breath came out in fast bursts. I touched the doorknob, and it felt colder than ice. My fingers went numb for a second,